Okay, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, welcome to the second panel of this conference, which is a little bit maybe down to earth because it is very much focused on the grassroots experience. And I also hope that it may be a little bit more positive because the general picture we got from the last panel about the polycrisis were, I would say, a rather bleak one, a lot of problems with coordination in the ways to tackle them. I think this is a great occasion to really go down to the grassroots level and come up with some success stories or even like more mixed lessons learned from the field. And I must say, I very much like the analogy about the chair brought by Richard. And from my experience, I would like to say, well, maybe resilience about the crisis is also about a broken leg, but sometimes things also like get healed organically, and you can use crutches somehow to help yourself. So it's a hard time, but in the end, we are going back to normal, or if not better. And also to draw on the introductory speech by Tanya, I think that it would be interesting in these grassroots experience to focus actually to have the say the good way of resilience. That means resilience that goes into strengthening rise of the local populations rather than just getting used to the crisis. Secondly, also the focus on prevention of their future problems rather than just doing quick fix in the short term. And finally, also a very important point, dealing with resilience in a way that goes forward as a development as a change. Well, development is social change, so societal change, rather than just going back to the original state. So with that, I would introduce our panelists. So in the speaking order, not necessarily the order you were seated, I would start with Mohamed Hamadi from Caritas Czech Republic. So you were a country director for Iraq, Turkey, and now also for Ukraine, which also I think it's pretty much says about the shift of priorities nowadays. Then we have Serkan Getaun from Ethiopia, who is an expert on environment, livelihood, and agriculture with people in need with their office in Awasa in the Southern Nations. Then we have also Kali Hoon, program coordinator for CARE, who has a broader experience from the Horn of Africa, Great Lakes region, and also Western Africa on the methodologies that use on in projects were more focused on women. And going like to more like general, coming back to Europe in some way, we have then also from Concord Sweden that you know, and who will be presenting the Concord's experience about creating methodology for better involvement of local communities. And last but not least, as a continuity from the last panel, but I would say a continuity and expertise in the Czech Development Corporation, Hanna Volna from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Deputy Head of the Deputy Director of the Development Corporation and Humanitarian Aid Department. So with that, we will have the same structure like the last panel. So we will start with maximum 7 minutes presentation for each of the speaker, then round the question before opening, of course, to your experience and to your comments and thoughts regarding resilience. So with that, Mohamed, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Yeah. Currently, I work as a country director for Caritas Czech Republic for Ukraine and Syria crisis response. But between 2018 and very recently, I was the country director for Iraq. So I will, yeah, as it was introduced, bring some examples from the field, grassroots examples. I will also walk you through the process how a field practitioner would translate what could be sophisticated terminologies like triple nexus into action at the field level. But yeah, so I will speak about Iraq and Syria, where most of my experience was accumulated. So let me start with the question, like when you heard about the Middle East recently at the news, what would be the most common headlines? If any answer from here? Like civil war, hostilities like sectarian and ethnic hostilities, Recently also climate change. So yeah, these are mostly the headlines that you would have the news. Well, except luckily in the next 2 weeks you will have some bright picture coming from the World Cup from Qatar. But I mean, speaking about like Iraq, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, these are countries that millions of people, or they have been spot for conflicts over the past decades. The last 10 years, the Arab Spring and the emerge of ISIS were catalyst events that forced millions of people to flee their homes and seek safety, either within their countries or they had to cross the border. So first in Iraq, yeah, again, I'll tell you how the strategy, like country program strategies shifted as the context developed. So after the defeat of ISIS in 2017, and when in a year from that day, the number of returnees exceeded for the first time in years the number of IDPs in the country. So Caritas Czech Republic and the NGO and UN community started to shift their strategies from only providing, of course, a humanitarian aid to introducing more durable solutions at the areas of return. So for Caritas Czech Republic, we engaged in partnerships with, well, 6 UN agencies, including the United Nations Development Program, United Nations Human Settlement Program, UN Habitat, and very recently also International Labour Organization. The main strategy, or like the objective of our country program strategy, was to still help those who cannot meet their basic needs, while in the same time enhance safety nets at the areas of return. So we make sure that they don't fall again beneath these safety nets. So Caritas Czech Republic worked and also utilized funding, generous funding from Czech Minister of Foreign Affairs and also non-institutional funding through the Czech Bishop Conference. We worked on like shelter rehabilitation, so to make sure that those who return to their areas have standard living conditions. Also in job creation and enhancing livelihoods. But in the same time, we were aware that there is well, risk has been, not risk, sorry, peace has been, or social cohesion has been shocked by displacement and return. So there was probably violations of house land and properties related to displacement and second displacement. So CCR and also many NGOs worked on improving or enhancing social cohesion. So with what I said, you noticed I mentioned the humanitarian aid, development, and peace. So that's the triple nexus. So that's how we, again, adjusted our strategy to be in line with the triple nexus. Now, but unfortunately, the political instability, social unrest, and very recently also climate change still hinder or they are key challenges on the way toward sustainable recovery in Iraq. And honestly, this unfortunate scenario also overshadows the neighboring Syria, the country that still suffer from the civil war, and half of the population is either IDP or refugee. So in Syria, I feel obliged to remind everyone that what we call today a civil war started as in 2011 with the aspiration of the Syrian population for, I mean, to end decades of dictatorships and demanded the freedom of speech. But yeah, the authorities in Damascus, and sorry, I'm deviating from the main topic, but I feel obliged to remind us. Yeah, the authorities dragged the whole movement into a civil war by, of course, facing the social movement with extreme violence. So yeah, the currently in Syria, the humanitarian needs are stressed repeatedly by UN OCHA through the humanitarian response plan, the humanitarian need overview. But in the same time, especially NGOs who worked in the two contexts, like Iraq and Syria, for instance, people in need may agree with me that we will use the lesson learned from Iraq into the Syrian context by combining humanitarian aid with more durable solutions, with investing more in the recovery. So we have to work on more on enhancing like civil society organizations to take the lead when the peace is achieved. So again, I mentioned the humanitarian aid, development, and peace. That's the recipe we need in the context. So I will now, well, let me mention one project we have, and that's an example. One project we have is funded by the European Commission, where we created like a knowledge transfer structure from CCR to grassroots organizations through one well-established Syrian NGO based in Turkey. So yeah, in September we were delivering a training to the colleagues of the Syrian NGO, and I already noticed it was really interesting how hard for many of the colleagues was to digest some of the terminologies that we imported from Iraq to the Syrian context. When we talked about durable solution, area-based coordination structure, and so on, they were like, really, what are you talking about? There are still these temporary authorities in the three different zones of the country. So like we are too far from there. And my argument was, okay, do you want to wait until the political resolution is given a push and then you suddenly say, what should I do now? No, you have to be prepared with this knowledge and transfer it, of course, to the civil society so they can take the lead in the next period, in the recovery period as well. So that would be, of course, the role of, it could be the role of NGOs to transfer this knowledge. It's one element of the peace building, but on the other hand, also that's probably for policymakers that we always have to promote that to achieve peace for the whole country, it's always the UN Resolution 2254. We have no other solution than that. Yeah, here I will stop. I hope I did not.
Okay, thank you. No, it's actually very much to the point to have this idea of like learning horizontally from one case to another, and actually, as was emphasized, the way to prevent the problems and the complexity of post-conflict reconstruction. Now, the floor goes to Serkalem, and I'm very curious about what your experience, especially from southern Ethiopia, is.
Okay. Good afternoon, all. Is working? Okay. Good afternoon. I think I have some pictures to display if it's possible, but no, if not, I will continue. That one is others. Yeah. Okay. It's already introduced. My name is Serkalem Getaun from People in Need Ethiopian Country Program, and I'm working in environmental livelihood and agricultural program as a technical expert based in Ethiopia, specifically Hawassa. So for the past 20 years, People in Need have been intervening in most part of our countries in different sectors like humanitarian and development activities, and our agriculture and landscape management activities are our agriculture and land management activities are more rely on the southern part of the country. So I will start with the challenges, how we intervene, and also our achievements. So to start with the To start with challenges of the community in southern Ethiopia that are related with climate change, I will focus in two points. That one of it is that land degradation and desertification caused due to different reasons like overgrazing, soil erosion, and also overgrazing, soil erosion, and also caused by deforestation and so many others. And the other one is erratic rainfall, which caused unexpected flooding and leading the community to temporary internal displacement to the other surrounding areas or qabeles, locally called qabeles, so to the surrounding communities. And I will only focus on this, but there are so many challenges, but the main are this one, so I will focus in this one. So when we go to how we are addressing the challenges, there are two approaches that we are using in PeopleInit: productive climate resilience, productive and climate resilience landscape management. Here we support preparation of these landscape management plans based on knowledge of the natural condition of the area, and together with research and electronic data collections, and also soil analysis. And all these help us to prepare a well-prepared landscape management plan for that specific area, considering or knowing better the areas. So here you can see that field level electronic data collections and generated different generated maps so that it will help the community or the local government structures to understand the real risk, and also to show them how it should be implemented to design their activities. It really helps them to do so, and even for monitoring activities. And after that, after preparing these landscape management plans, we also support the real implementation of the activities, the recommended practices as per the guideline or as per the landscape management plan. So here you can see that there are different structures, soil and water conservation structures done in the upper part of the watershed. So the problem was that the problem is everywhere. So the local community and the government is acting according to the need of the community, not respecting the real watershed boundaries. So what this landscape management plan really helps is to respect these watershed boundaries. So these structures are constructed following this landscape management plan. As you can see, the structures constructed in the upper part of the watersheds really conserve the soil and also reduce the velocity of the water coming from the upper side of the watershed. So the lower side of the area where the community are living will not be distracted, and the soil will be conserved there. So the community will not be displaced to other places, and we will not be shifting, so they will do their farming right here on their own lands. In the lower part, you can see also some water conservation structures. The area is highly degraded area, so water conservation structures are really needed there. So different water conserving structures are constructed, and you can see that water are really conserved and really they are ready to support the seedlings that will be planted. The physical conservation activity will be done like this, and after that it will also will be supported by biological conservation activity. So we support a community in nurseries to produce different forest, locally available different forest seedlings, so as to plant on those constructed areas. And the other approach is nutrition sensitive climate smart agriculture intervention. Here we support the community to produce a different kind of crops, locally available crops in a more sustainable way. So on their farms, like we promote this conservation agriculture practice to apply on their farms, and also production of organic composts like vermicomposts, and also promotion of different drought resistance and nutritious crops like orange fleshed sweet potato, which is very rich in vitamin A, and it is very good for infants. So what else is needed other than the above indicated interventions to make the intervention successful? The main thing is that understanding the local context. Understanding the local context is a key issue that before intervening, before doing any activity for the local peoples, we have to understand the local context. We have to do research. We have to support our interventions with research and survey data. And also we have to cooperate with the local system or the locally available government structures. What we do here is that we as a people in need, when we do all the activities at the ground level, there are different structures set by the government and also local community structures like this. For example, for the natural resource management activity, there is one community structures called Watershed Management Committee, and also for this health activities, there is also health development armies, and also in agriculture there are also agricultural development armies. So we support those structures to know the real cause of the challenges, and we aware them. So when we aware them, they will be willing to support and to do those activities, and also they will also take ownership to sustain those activities that have been implementing. So we support and strengthen all those structures in the Kabbalah level. The other one is research data and digital solutions. All the implementation activity, as I said, should be supported by different research data, soil surveys, and maps. And what we did is that, and we also put them for sharing. So it will be available for the next activities. As you can see, this one is one of the the generated maps, and also the one you see in the lower part is that the soil survey reports that that is collected from the ground level and displayed for monitoring and evaluation. And this one is also electronic data collection that we do in one of our projects to monitor different constructed soil and water conservation structures that have been implemented. So when we go to our achievements, for the past 10 years, implementing these agricultural and natural resource managements, More than 7,000 so farmers have been trained by People in Need in different training packages, and nearly 1,000 of government extension workers have been trained, both in health and agriculture, and also more than 8,000 of hectare of land have been treated in both in physical and biological activities in the area of Halaba and Sidama areas in the southern part of Ethiopia. So finally, when I saw so, to bring community resilience and supporting when we do this kind of activity, when we do this natural resource management, it needs a longer time to see the output or to see the result. It's not kind of some kind of agricultural activity that we will see the results in few 3 or 2 years of periods. So this kind of activity needs a longer periods to see the result and to show the community how it is working and to sustain the activity. It needs a longer periods. So when projects are designed, it should be for the longer periods, not even for 3 or 2 years, but more than 3 years to see the results. And expanding and doing this kind of activity needs really a big fund. It cannot be done with small budgets that it will be showing something few, and it will not be sustainable in doing so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Serkalam. Very nice to show the importance also of technology at the local level, something that we haven't mentioned before. And also, as the pictures have shown, I think it's a perfect bridge for Carl's presentation, showing women as a kind of driving force of Africa's agriculture and environmental conservation. So the floor is yours, Carl, for your experience at a larger African level from the projects with CARE International.
I'll start anyways, but all right. Thank you so much, and really thank you and congratulations for the forum as well for organizing such a timely and important topic and for bringing us all here to contribute to it. I will focus mostly on our experience from what we call Village Saving and Loan Association. So you will hear me a lot saying VSLAs, and that's what it stands for. And I'll talk about how CARE uses VSLAs and how we see from our recent return of investment studies and research we've done through COVID, how we see this building resilience in communities, particularly women and girls specifically. To give a bit of a background, because so that we all understand what VSLAs are, it's a programmatic approach that CARE have used since 1991. It started in Niger. It's usually like a self-selected, self-managed group of people. So we have 15 to 25 people in a VSLA, and they contribute money, so they save money. They take loan from the group, and they also have a social fund that they use for emergencies and social situation. So it does serve as an informal safety net, an informal insurance within that community. But it does go beyond the economic and financial aspect, and we see it as a great platform, particularly for women, to raise their voices, to engage in community leadership, and also address issues of social and gender norms and GBV as well. Because of our program target, we often target women. So in most of the countries that we work in, 70 to 80% of our VSLA members are women. And that's done in purpose because women are often disproportionately excluded from financial, formal financial institution, economic opportunities, and they carry a lot of, social and gender burdens as well. But it doesn't mean we don't work with men. We have men VSLA members as well. It's just like the percentage is not that huge. But we also work with men and boys through different men and boys engagement processes. So far, different assessment, we see that the VSLA group actually helped them to increase their saving. Women are more likely to own assets when they participate in VSLAs. They're also more likely to engage in leadership as well. We also see improved confidence and improved self-esteem because of the different training and the different participation they have. And we see a huge social solidarity between VSLA members. Since 1991, CARE had helped 13.7 million people to join VSLAs. And I'll talk later about the scaling strategy. We wanted to be able to build on this proven approach and reach out around like 65 million people by 2030, which 50 million of them would be women and girls. So our recent return of investment study, we targeted data from 8 countries, which is Ethiopia, Burundi, Rwanda, Malawi, Bangladesh, Haiti, and Mozambique. And what we're seeing is for every money invested in VSLAs, we see improvement in food security in household members who participate in VSLAs. We see improvement in education. We see improvement in saving. So some of the data you see here that when they participate in VSLAs for a year, for every dollar that is invested, we see the women saving increased to 14 US dollar. If we combine it with, if we layer it with additional components such as health and education, that increased to $22. We also see in terms of the education piece, which that I absolutely love, because when you invest on women, you're also making investment on generation as well. 80% of the respondents, they actually said, when we have money, we spend it on kids' education. And some of the calculation we did show that for every $250 spent on VSLAs, 3 more kids would go to school. In terms of the food security aspect, and we see this in comparison, so it's a relativity, right? So for household to have VSLA member, they're 50-60% to be food secure. In a very extreme food insecurity time, they're more likely 70% to be more food insecure. So that means they will eat at least once a day or twice a day. This is in comparison with households who doesn't have the VSLA or this financial cushion. The other piece is the confidence and the leadership aspect, where women who participate in VSLAs are 15% more likely to participate in local leadership. They participate in local engagement. And I will back up that with certain examples we see during COVID. So the COVID thing is a very recent and it's a very important example. Richard, earlier you were saying like it's the people themselves on the ground who actually face the changes and the challenges. And with COVID, I think we've seen our limitation because we couldn't go to the field and we were stuck. So, but they were there addressing and dealing with the situation. So one of the studies that was funded by the Gates Foundation, CARE have an initiative called Women Respond. And we launched this in, COVID was like March, right? So April, Women Respond was launched. And then the Gates one specifically targeted Ethiopia, Burundi, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, and Uganda. So these are 6 countries, and we did regular listening exercise with VSLAs. So we have the voice of more than 4,000 VSLA members. 79% are women and girls. They are impacted, like most people, so they lost some of their livelihood. Saving is reduced. They were not meeting regularly, so they were meeting irregularly. But what we've seen on the other hand is they also try to adapt and continue their meeting. So 81% of them said, even if we can't meet, face-to-face, when it's possible, like the Nigeria case, they try to meet on WhatsApp, so they're trying like digital approach. In countries where that's not possible, they either were meeting in a smaller number of people, or they meet less frequently, or they just go to the leader's door so that they can just drop their saving. So they did adapt. And then they said, our saving is low, but we didn't stop saving. So whatever amount available to them, they were giving loan to members. They were using their social fund so that they can support education and health needs as well. And you see a quotation from a VSLA treasurer in Nigeria where she talked about how the social fund were supporting them to access, to pay for health services, to pay for education. The most amazing thing for us was like, even if these are like a small examples of resilience, like the community, the VSLA members were helping beyond their members. And we usually assume that their members would benefit, and of course they did. But what we've seen, for instance, in Mali and Niger, the VSLAs realized that there was a market gap around masks and soap, so they start producing masks locally. Of course, this is not a sustainable business model because the gap happened at the beginning of the pandemic, and then there were available masks anyways. But at least for the beginning, they take this unfortunate situation into like a business opportunity. In all the 6 countries, we saw a huge mobilization by VSLA members where they go around talking about what's COVID, because there was a lot of misconception. They, like in Niger, they collaborated with the health centers so that they can provide more information. In Burundi, Ethiopia, Niger, we've seen VSLAs taking their own money so that they can construct hand washing centers in their communities. So they made an effort to invest with the little, and they don't have a lot of money, even if they have savings. So from that little amount, they were actually going to help community members. We've seen a huge mobilization in Nigeria and Ethiopia where there was a spike in early marriage because of the school closure. So VSLA women were taking the lead to, work with local government partners, work with local NGOs to curb the early marriage that they were seeing. So these are like very few examples that we see that when they get support, they can actually take different action. And when we collected the data, we knew that the information is as important to them as it to us. So as much as possible, we made sure data is available for them so that it can support their local activism and so on. So the main thing we try to do within CARE is, because we know this is a proven approach, we wanted to scale it up. So CARE had a commitment to reach 65 million through VSLAs, including the one we reached before, the 13.7 by 2030, and 50 million of them would be women and girls. And some of the pathway that is identified is for us to be able to work with government so that it have a government scale-up pathway, working with different private sectors so that financial institutions specifically, so that they can gear their services so that it is adaptable to the women in the community. Mostly they are seen as risk group because no financial institution think that they would pay their loans and so on. But there is an incentive for private sector also to engage, but the modality need to be different. The other piece is the digital aspect, which is very difficult because in a lot of the countries we work in, access to mobile phone, access to connectivity is very limited, but we're doing different pilots in Rwanda and Uganda as well. So 3 main things that I would leave you with is A, it is really, really important to listen to women, to listen to community members. And they are the one that, localization agenda, everybody agree with it, but a lot of the funding is not going there, and I think everybody in the earlier panelists talked about this. The second piece is we can always do better in terms of building resilience so that we don't have to deal with a full-fledged humanitarian crisis at the end. So in the COVID case, and they're not just dealing with one crisis, right? And COVID was a good example. COVID happened, and then there were different climate change crises, and then there was security crisis as well, and now like the food crisis as well. So they're dealing with compounded effects of this crisis. So even if they're resilient, they didn't have enough time to recover. So the time lapse between this crisis was really, so whenever people talk about recovery, it's kind of, there wasn't enough time to be able to recover and rebuild the livelihood they lost. So they keep getting hit. So it's very important to be able to strengthen some of the things they lost. And the other piece is particularly for donors and development agencies to actually make sure that not just the funding, but also when we do assessment, when we collect data, do the voice go back to them so that they can use it in their activism as well. So a combination of things. And we can't always solve it through financial initiative. It needs to be blended with the gender aspect because a lot of the crises we see are embedded in inequalities in the communities we work with. It's mostly gender, but also socioeconomic inequalities as well. I'll stop here. I think I'm over time.
Thank you very much, Carlo. Well, in spite of all the challenges, I think it has shown very well that something that wasn't really intended, microfinance, to deal with, nobody knew about COVID. Actually, not only did it help to have it as a safety net for such a crisis, but even to go further and use these local organizations to develop initiatives to mitigate through the production of masks and so on. So I think that shows very well the importance of the local level. However, we are now in Prague. We are now in the European Union, and as donor countries, as donor organizations, how do we connect to that situation? How can we support? How can we translate experience from one place to another, if it's possible? So I'm asking you also because you have this kind of like combined experience from Concord and the methodology you work on actually to facilitate this with your members in Sweden. So the floor is yours now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, and actually before, because at the moment I've worked quite closely with members in Sweden, and we do a lot of work on sort of what kind of policies, what kind of strategies are desirable also at a bilateral donor level or an EU level to be able to support just this, because I think that just because we are here in Prague, in the EU, and quite far away from the reality of local communities in the examples that we've heard, that makes it even more important. I mean, it requires an enormous amount of both political will and will to question ourselves and to be difficult to our back donors, etc., if we want to work in a way that truly strengthens local communities and their resilience. And I wanted to mention as well that before my life as a policy advisor, I worked some 15 years in development programs in different parts of the world. So I mean, I have worked, and because of that, I'm convinced that the key to really building local resilience and the key to actually making sure that development and change works and provides real change for people and for communities, for me, the answer to that will always be civil society. And I say this because in my experience, unfortunately not in Ethiopia, which would have been great to be able to compare, but in my experience in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, in Cambodia, I mean, any development work done by any type of donor anywhere, in the end, like, you can follow the money down, and in the end, when it decides whether or not this will create positive, real change for the community, it's always about people organizing. Nothing can make sure that development work in a program is successful quite as much as really listening and really organizing those local communities. And nothing can make sure that it goes south and goes really, really badly quite as fast as having extremely poor connection to the organizing in the local community. I have this example, I won't mention from which country, but I was talking to a local council member in a local climate adaptation and agriculture program that I was a part of working with. And this, he was an elderly gentleman, and we talked about, okay, so, you know, what has been done so far? And they had done just one visit to a new community where they wanted to work, and they were like asking to the local organization that we were supporting and financing their work with grassroots groups, yes, can we get started? And they were like, no, but we need to go and have this discussion with the community. We need to check, like, what kinds of organizing is going on, what kind of groups are there, like, what are the opinions of the community? And he was like, no, the community has been participated. Because they visited, you know, once, and he was like, oh, participation. It's like, we go there, we participate them, and now we go. I mean, and you can guess whether or not this development work, you know, the chance of it being successful and leaving lasting results after the actual activities were gone. So I think that the key to this is making sure that you connect to the organic organizing going on with people, and you help them connect to other aspects and other actors in civil society at the local and regional and national level, so that there is an organic organizing going on when the development work is no longer in program phase. Anyway, so this is my conviction that civil society is extremely important, and it doesn't matter if it's not a civil society program. Like, even in like a World Bank funded land conflict situation that we had in Cambodia, I mean, the outcome for local communities always come from whether or not there are actors in civil society that are looking out for the interests of people and helping them set up, helping them organize to make sure that they have the best outcomes. So whether it's food production or savings, this for me is the most important part. What I wanted to say as well is that effective local action doesn't happen by accident. I'm so glad, I mean, you started with understanding the local context in depth, which I think is key. You need to understand who's there, you need to understand the actors, who they're connected to, you need to understand the power dynamics of the situation. And you need to understand what people think about what's needed for actual change to happen. And of course, you need, as you were talking about, the most important key part to build actual resilience is to listen to communities. You need participation, not having been participated, but rather have a real process where people participate. And you need resources. You need money, you need people, you need time. Someone else mentioned the importance of like really long-term processes and long-term relationships with the communities from whoever is doing this. And I think sometimes even we as a sector, as international civil society, we're a bit afraid of the whole topic of, money and funding when it comes to making sure that it goes to local civil society. And I really think it is important to look at those resources and where they're going. Just to say some of the policies, I'm going to count them. We worked quite a lot on sort of good donorship, and we also in Sweden, we have Sida is quite a good agency in the sense of civil society. Some of the key points, I'm going to stop now. Some of the key points I think is to have a consistent, recurrent, systematic dialogue, also at not just about funding, but also at the political level between donors and civil society, or between like international actors and civil society, and visits outside the capital, not just dialogue where it's at, but actually going out into rural areas and talking to people and trying to understand how things work in the context. A very useful point, which is also highlighted in a new OECD DAC recommendation for donors, is to have a specific CSO policy or CSO strategy for support to civil society. And I think that's a very good point, because support to civil society is not just about, that civil society has expertise in certain sectors, that too, but there's also a value in strengthening civil society, strengthening organizations, strengthening their relationships to their members or to the grassroots groups, and strengthening their relationships to other peers or outside the country even, so that organizations are set up and have a good network to work with, even in difficult times. Sometimes we know that social movements or other organizations can have a difficult time. So that's super important to have a dedicated civil society budget line for the strengthening, but also allowing civil society, because of their expertise, to be part of other thematic and geographic budget lines. And then I think it's also important, but I can talk more about that, to try to also build the capacity internally in the donor institutions. Sida's Unit for Civil Society has sort of guiding principles that they're trying to implement in all the units. Doesn't always work, because not all the units are interested in civil society. But it's really good to try to build this capacity internally, and understanding why it's good to listen to communities and work with civil society. Yep.
Thank you very much, Åsa. There was a number of recommendations for donors actually to engage better with civil society organizations. Now let's listen to the actual donor. They are a rather small one, Czech Republic. So, Hanna Volna, what are the lessons learned from the Czech Development Cooperation programs on supporting civil society? Also, localization was actually one of the topic of the Czech priorities within the Czech presidency. So, what is your take on these?
Yeah, so perhaps I would start with, there was mentioned in the previous panel, Grand Bargain initiative, where there is enabling priority financing and localization. And actually, Czechia is the only country which in localization reaches actually the target of 20%, even sometimes 30%. And it's because perhaps also that we are a smaller donor, so we try to approach local contacts, and also, of course, then we can see that there are local partners. And we have no limitations in humanitarian assistance, no limitations to finance directly local partners. And we try to use the knowledge of local partners also in development cooperation. There, of course, there are some more tightened rules, but I look at Richard. So we at least try in the development cooperation to support or promote the partnerships, Czech and local NGOs. And in this way, we have actually discovered several things. One is that, for instance, in like disaster risk reduction, preparedness, and resilience, there is always with the donors the question, who shall finance it? Should it be from development? Should it be from humanitarian? Should there be a third part called stabilization? It's the same with Syria, actually, also. So many donors, including the European Commission, they have the siloed budgets, and some of the, especially stabilization things, they simply fall apart of all of these budgets. So we, as a smaller donor, we exactly try to pilot these activities. For instance, in Syria, we were the first donor financing back in 2012 cross-border assistance to Syria, long before the European Commission, long before the FID and all the others, just to show that it's possible to implement. The same, back in 2016, we were the first EU country, at least EU country, starting with the stabilization in Syria, financing simply not only urgent assistance, but also stabilization for the communities with water structures and health structures and agriculture and everything. And we also always try to use these pilotings like to inspire other donors. With the cross-border, of course, we succeeded because there were several other donors following us. With the stabilization in Syria also, there are several donors already financing this. And with the disaster risk reduction or anticipatory action, it was actually a topic now in September. We had the development and humanitarian parts, European donors here in Prague, and we discussed very much the opportunities for development to finance also the solutions, like you have solutions which allow both for development action and for early action in times of problems. And my learning from this is, of course, there's the need for a real encounter with local communities, but for sustainability, you still also need some governance structures and some institutions who will work both for the local communities and for the longer term resilience. And our target is also to try to, because now with Agenda 2030, so there is a big talk also in the UN and in the EU engaging the private sector. And we think many donors look after some more investment-related foundings, but in some contexts, the fragile context, it's impossible because you can offer investment, but you do not get the private sector to come simply and to invest. So our target would be to really find some models or solutions where the public sector with the local civil society and with the private sector can work together, because all of them have their own mandates and also their own capacities, and if they set it together, so then there can be a like a result. And again, people in need in Cambodia, the early warning, early action system. So it was exactly developed partly with several donors, UNDP Development Funding, DG ECO Humanitarian, we Humanitarian Funding, and partly also at scale. So you need the governance, and you can also train the governance and create some governance to this. And you need, of course, also some sort of private sector actors, for instance, mobile phone companies or insurance companies or banking, local banking, and so on, who shall also fit into these solutions. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I very much like the idea about also highlighting what we have not done before, the other actors. I mean, talking about the technologies. If you just don't have mobile phone coverage, it's very difficult to use some GP or mobile-based GPS technologies for community mapping and so on. So that was one thing, and the other thing is there is a kind of like elephant in the room, which is also the European Union. So I would like, before giving the floor to you, I would just like to respond quickly to the question from your field experience or from your experience as a donor or civil society representatives. What is for you? What would be the main message for the EU to actually facilitate these financing and coordination at local level? Because of course EU is a big donor. I very much also like the idea about small donors being kind of like pioneers to do experiments, perhaps with some risk of failure, but like showing the way for the huger, more bureaucratic organization as the European Commission to step in later and provide more substantial funding, which of course is not available for smaller donors. So that can be one of the ways. But Mohammed, in your what was the EU in the field that you worked on? What could be done better in the future?
By the first panel, the example of DG ECO and the rest of the EU funding instruments. So yeah, with DG ECO, it's very limited scope with the humanitarian response. So okay, when you want to talk about the next step, or you want to use, I don't know, triple nexus or development in your proposal, it's yeah, you will have a lot of resistance. And that's what we see in the consultations that before any funding cycle. So having different funding instruments at the EU make it a bit challenging to have the complementarity at the proposal stage, because like, how can I tell ECHO that, yeah, I can guarantee funding 2 years from now, or like next year, 2024, so I can take those who were assisted with the humanitarian aid to next level and they will receive more longer term solutions. This cannot happen, right? So, and vice versa. So again, like, yeah, having the many funding instruments make it challenging at the field in this regard.
Thank you very much. Sarah Kalam, what is your experience and what could you do in your context in southern Ethiopia?
Okay. To say that doing for this community resilience, to bring a resilient community, I can say that we should do this natural resource management activities, because to do the other activities with the community or on the farm, we have to first save the top fertile soil so the farmer will stay on his own farms and produce and he can produce different kind of crops, and he will be for himself and also produce for others. So this kind of natural resource management activity, I think, should be supported in wider ways, not in few kind of activity, but it should be supported.
Thank you very much. Carl, well, your experience from different countries in Africa, what the EU could do
Okay.
to...
Oh, it works. I think most of it has been said, but I would also want to reiterate what we said in the first panel. Like longer term funding, right? Like you can't build resilience with short term funding. It is not something that happened overnight, right? And in like understanding the context, usually a lot of projects we do like they do like traditional assessment, right? Moving forward, you know, a bit past from that and trying to listen to community experience, but you don't see available funding around that, right? Like even if you do maybe assessment, maybe you do it at the beginning, a bit of a gender assessment or a need assessment, what we call it. And a lot of the assessment actually like focuses on identifying gap and not capabilities. And if we're saying if we wanted to move towards more local actors to take action, you also need to understand what is the capability within the local context and how can we best support that process. I think that's one other thing that I would add. A third piece that I would say is because of the position they have as a, you know, like huge international actor, you can push for some national policies to be really inclusive, right? And we do work in that arena. Like a very recent example we have is the Uganda government just adopted the self-help group operational guideline, which identify women's group and, you know, informal financial groups as an entity, but with their informality, right? So such donors, such huge international actors could actually gear some national actors to have a more inclusive social and financial policies that does consider like vulnerable group. And also, I know the private sector thing is not easy, but they have a certain power to advocate for that and shape that structure.
Osa, what would be your take on the EU? We had some conversations yesterday
Well,
about
I mean, I've worked, I don't have extensive experience, but I've worked in a few different countries, and my impression there is mostly consistent to what I've since then learned in Concord Europe as well, in sort of exchanging experience about how others conceive the EU at country level or close to the work, and I think that it's quite different. Like it's quite depending on who are the individuals that are there. Like the EU can play a very different role in one country compared to the other, and it can also change pretty quickly depending who is there and has leadership roles in the delegation, and also who is there from the member states. So I do realize that there's challenging, but exactly because of this, I think it's so important that the EU have sort of good guidelines from the central level, from Brussels, so that all delegations realize that these things about engaging with civil society, engaging with communities outside of the capital or outside of regional capitals is not optional. It's something that's part of good development cooperation. It's something that's part of being able to assess the situation in the country. Because I personally can't understand why you wouldn't want to have a lot of dialogue with all the different levels and expressions of relevant organizations in the country. That's also how you how you realize from a sort of independent outside perspective what's going on in government, what's going on in like the economy of the country, like what's going on in all of these things that you as a major international player in the country should really be aware of. And I think that the delegations and the people, very competent, qualified people I met in some EU delegations, they realize this. They realize that civil society is not something that you're supposed to sort of push off on like one program officer that gets half time to do like civil society dialogue, and then you don't, listen to that person, but rather something that you can use to understand the country deeply and understand what different movements and and people are there. And specifically about that, when you engage with civil society, also extremely important for resilience is to engage specifically with marginalized groups, to engage with women, to engage with indigenous peoples, small-scale farmers, and sort of local community grassroots groups and organizations that have good connections with them, instead of just calling any civil society organization that wants to come to a consultation with the EU, and you get mostly urban or international groups. So it's really important to have your own idea about like, who do I want to engage with, and who are the relevant representative actors that I can learn from in this country.
Okay, thank you. Now, you have already presented some recommendations in the previous panel. Maybe I would like to put it a little bit forward, because now we have the Team Europe initiatives, the Global Gateway, maybe a little bit more of just new brands for all things. So, looking forward, what would be your take on the role of the EU, and what could be improved in those new instruments that are now being a little bit of a buzzwords in Brussels and in the capitals?
Yeah, actually, when we started with the Team Europe approach under the COVID pandemic, so I realized that the EU, they have a different relation between Brussels and delegations in the EU countries. Delegations are very powerful agents, and they can propose to Brussels and many actions and so on. Whereas the member states, it's the other way around. So the powerful agent is the headquarter, and the embassies are instructed by the headquarter what to do mainly. And this creates, in fact, quite a big problem, because in many of the countries, we very much struggle as member states in cooperation with the delegation, because the delegation is much more powerful than the embassies of the countries. And then it also happens that it's quite difficult, for instance, with the needs assessments that EU makes its own needs assessments, big donors also, etc. Because there is no real connection between the countries and the EU at the country level. So in this way, and it's also with the financing. Actually, we have tried several times already in the coordination on Nexus, both in the EU and in OECD, which is the guardian of the Triple Nexus recommendation, to highlight that you shall have the Nexus not only that all donors in all sectors, like humanitarian development and peace. You can also have perhaps 3 big donors in peace, then 10 donors in humanitarian, it's usually everywhere there, and then 5 in development. And then you shall also find the connections between the 10 humanitarians who will exit after 6 or 10 months, and with those 5 development actors who shall take over and follow. So, and this has not happened yet. So I would like to see that the European Commission or European Union is an actor in this, to work with other donors in this way, in this thinking, that we shall also try to interconnect the many humanitarian donors with the fewer development donors and with the even fewer peace actors. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Actually, I see that the problems identified by the donors as well the organizations are not that different in terms of assessing the European Commission and the delegation. So I think that's a great takeaway from this discussion. At this point, I would now open the floor to your comments, questions, grassroots experience, if you represent development organizations. I would also please ask maybe Katarzyna or someone to circulate the A mic? Oh, okay. So there is a mic there. So please raise your hand if you have Lenka. And if you can also introduce yourself shortly before asking a question to the panelists.
Good afternoon. My name is Lenka Sucha. I'm from the Global Change Research Institute of the Czech Academy of Sciences. And I'm wondering, because in the first panel, there was quite a lot of said about the crisis we are facing, and especially the climate crisis we are facing. And a lot of the things you were discussing in this panel, especially the experience from Ethiopia, actually has a lot to do with climate change. And if we are talking about funding, so I'm just wondering, what's the interplay between the Green Climate Fund and the development cooperation? And I'm not really sure whether I'm asking the right panel there, but it's just like really burning question the whole time. Thanks a lot for the answer.
Okay, burning question. Do we have a burning answer from anyone of the panelists or on climate finance and development finance?
Not at all my area of expertise, but we did in Concord, Sweden, a study on just because a lot of our members were confused about the same, what is the relationship with the commitments on climate financing and development cooperation, and in sort of how do these interrelate, and what should we as a civil society platform who's with a lot of members who are working on climate adaptation issues, what should we be thinking? And I mean, the Green Climate Fund, it is development cooperation. I mean, what we're seeing is that most of the global funds that are set up in the in the system of the climate convention, I mean, the good part of the Green Climate Fund is that it has a fairly even level between programs to lower emissions and climate adaptation programs, which if you ask any given community member in in Ethiopia or anywhere else, they say, well, yes, this is happening now, and we're facing a drought here, and we're facing a lot of problems because of this, and we didn't cause this crisis. And of course, they most likely are interested in how do we cope with this crisis and how do we adapt. And I mean, of course, donors are more lowering emissions is sort of a global goal of more mutual interest to both the donor communities and also to some of the partner countries. So in that sense, the good part, so the overall picture is that donors are more prefer to support emissions reduction. And so the good part about Climate Fund is that it's fairly even, but the hard part is that it's very sort of inaccessible, and there's like a fairly little of it that's accessible to the least developed countries or to CSOs, and yeah, it's just a long way to go, sort of, for that money. That was our conclusion.
Yeah. On that note, I can't really help myself to be a little bit sarcastic, because the Czech Prime Minister yesterday in Sharm el-Sheikh announced that the Czech Republic would renew its contribution to the Global Climate Fund at the height of €1 million per year, which is, I mean, I would say like totally absurd given the challenges. And yes, I mean, an average Czech citizen has like 10 times more emissions than an average citizen in Ethiopia. So the responsibility for what's happening worldwide is pretty clear, I would say. So sorry for that, but I really couldn't got me a little bit angry to see that the commitment at the political level in the Czech Republic is not at the head of the challenges. Other questions, comments, please?
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much, Nicolas Lacroix from Action Against Hunger. My question is to Khalgi Mohammed and Serkalem. You've provided example of trying to strengthen resilience, mainly with regards to the economic resilience of the population. Now, in most of the country that we as civil society work, well, we are partially functioning state or partially collapsing state, or at least certain sector are not functioning properly in order to achieve any kind of resilience. Speaking about, in particular, of the social services, I mean, there's only so much that we can achieve collectively, for example, to rebuild an health sector in remote area if you don't have a functioning state who's going to pick up the bill in 5, 10 years. So with the increased fragility, especially in Africa, how do you believe that, especially with regard to basic services, that we can realistically achieve any kind of, not even talking about sustainability, of a working model that can allow us to rebuild from the beginning, but also to be realistic, because with not even talking about education, without a state, without massive investment in order to support social services in remote places, while the government, for example, is interested in investing in secondary care or tertiary care for urban population, it is very difficult to achieve this, whatsoever the money that the donor is going to throw at it, or the support we're going to have from local community. Thank you.
Okay. Resilience and state capacity, good question. Whoever wants to answer. Tricky question, I agree.
Thank you for the question, Nicola. Well, in the example of the Middle East, that's why I stressed the triple nexus, so that humanitarian and development and peace, they should come together, because we saw examples of, like, if you want to only deliver humanitarian aid, like how many generations do you want to see families with only reliance on humanitarian aid? Okay, so, and what is your exit strategy? That's always the question we will have from donors. If you do, humanitarian aid and you invest in recovery and development, so like you start to create jobs and enhance the market and improve value chain, then, and you don't have sustainable peace, then next month the front lines will be active again, and all the community that you invested in will be again displaced and again rely only on a humanitarian assistance. So that's why peace is very necessary, and peace has different, let's say, overlapping or different layers. For instance, if I will focus again on Syria, so peace will start, of course, from the highest level with the UN resolution and the transitional justice and so on. But at the community level, there is the dialogue, and that's where the NGOs can play really a vital role. Dialogue between the different community groups, ethnic groups, and also between probably like returnees and stayees in some areas, okay, and different parts of active front lines. This will be the recipe to have a sustainable recovery in a protracted context like Syria and the Middle East. I will give the mic to colleagues from Africa.
Oh, I mean, I don't think there is an easy answer for this. If we had, I think we wouldn't be in this room. But I think the main thing is, and I think Mohammed said it well, like, we can't continue to do humanitarian support if countries kept going through fragile state, right? And like the coup d'etats happening since 2020 is a really good example. And that can be a regular process. So the example that from the VSLA one is very specific, program aspect. But when a state is in a fragile context, there have to be like a combination of different solutions, right? And working through social cohesion, which is if there is like differences within the community, could be because of religious difference, ethnic or whatsoever. working with like state building. I know like governance is a very important aspect, and this is not something one NGO does. You know, at the end of the day, it have to be like a combination of things. We did taste VSLA approach in emergency setting, and our pilot was Yemen, right? But it can't change the whole system. It's just, it create a system that would support those women who's part of the VSLA. But we know like for a bigger change, and then we need a combination of approach, because there is no like silver bullet to the problem. So I do understand, and I know like it's frustrating while a lot of the services, if they're not operating, if the market's not operating, even if these are a tested approach, they're not potentially going to work, right? But that's why it's important to have like context-specific solution as well, but also ensuring that, you know, addressing the peace part, which is the social cohesion piece, the markets it's also important, and then building, you know, from the grassroots, but also from the top. It kind of like, it create people a certain voice so that they can provide services as well. But yeah, no, I don't think like there is an easy solution, but I get it. In some contexts, it would be completely different or difficult, to be exact, to just implement the VSLA approach and say like, you know, financial systems, gender equality, and then you be able to send children to school. If there is not school, that's not necessarily a proper step. But we can't always offer humanitarian support like forever, so there got to be a solution there.
Would anyone on the panel like to add anything? All right, I think we are a little bit behind the schedule now, because we also started a little bit later. But at this point, I think we can continue this conversation informally here. And so I would like to thank you, just as a kind of also follow-up for tomorrow, because the conference, of course, continues. I think two takeaways I take from this panel, and also from the previous one, that resilience building, to be really like focus at the root causes, is a long-term process, and for a long-term process you also need long-term finance, and it's also a complex process, and you need also complex and complementary finance. So I think from this panel, basically the challenge to match those long-term and different coordination between different tools to support local initiatives, to really to have the right meaning of resilience, just not being a fad or buzzword, is pretty clear from the panel, and I think that's a good end for the discussion. And so, yep, you were like invited to formal discussions. Thank you very much to other panelists for your inputs from Africa, Middle East, and from the EU. Thank you also very much for your attention and your valuable question and inputs to the discussion. So thank you, and bye.
Yes, and we have two brilliant panels behind us. And Andre already invited us for some informal meetings here, and we have a chance to debate, and we have a small reception and space for some socializing, but it will not be taking place here, but on the 7th floor. And so if you will go there, please take also your belongings from here to there, so that you can leave the room easily and or the building easily, and do not need to interfere back here in this space. But tomorrow in the morning we are meeting here again, and we are starting at 9:20 actually. There will be two more panels, one on the complex solutions in resilience building, and one focused on Ukraine, especially on stabilization and reconstruction aspects. And these two panels will be followed by two workshops, which one is technological innovation and development in relation to food security, and the second is on Concord Aid Watch Report 2022 in detail. So those of you who did not make up your mind so far which workshop you would like to join, you still can do it. More workshops will also be taking place here tomorrow in the afternoon, so you can also decide at the last minute, but the facilitators would be happy to know roughly the numbers. So I think we will figure out in the morning maybe. Thank you.